Greetings everyone. The topic for today is related to the figures of speech. But if you haven't subscribed my YouTube channel, subscribe it to get more updates related to the lessons which I'm uploading. Let's move ahead with the figures of speech. So we have different figures of speech. As you can see, we have pun, we have simile, we have irony, we have understatement, we have synecdoche, we have metonymy, we have assonance, we have chiasmus, we have euphemism. So one by one we will be discussing each one. For pun, it is a play on words. It uses a word to give a different sense to the sentence and add a double meaning. For example, you can see that an egg for breakfast is not easy to beat. For example, we have the other one for simile. It is a phrase which compares something to something else using the words like or as. I felt as high as a kite. So you can see over here for irony, we have irony is it for the definition we know that it is a statement which conveys the exact opposite meaning of what is literally being said. So it is also a statement which can contradict in the situation. So the pilot had a fear of flying. So it is a contradictory statement that you can see. For understatement, you can see that understatement is a statement which is made to be less important than what is actually being conveyed. For example, I only have $2 million. So that is understatement. For synecdoche, you can see that synecdoche is a statement in which only part of something is expressed to relate to the whole. For example, you can see that he has just got some new wheels. For metonymy, you can see that metonymy is when a phrase is replaced with another which has a similar meaning used to describe something in an indirect manner. I remain loyal to the crown. So there are a few other examples which you can read. And for assonance, it is the similarly assonance is similarly in the sound between the vowels in the middle of the neighboring words. So you can see how now brown cow, the assonance in the initial words. So or at the start you can see. So for chiasmus, it is when two sentences are balanced against one another but with the words reversed. So words to live and do not live to work. So work is to live and do not work to live. And so you can see that two sentences are balanced against one another but with the first word is reversed. So for euphemism, you can see that it is the replacement of a phrase which might be deemed offensive by one which implies the same meaning but does not carry offense with it. For example, instead of he died, you would say he passed away. So other examples are also mentioned, as you can see, and all these go for the euphemism. Now we have furthermore examples and few other types of figures of speech. We have metaphor, we have metonymy, onomatopoeia, oxymoron, paradox, personification, we have pun, simile, synecdoche, understatement. Half of them were being discussed in the previous slide and other half is not discussed, so we'll be discussing all of them once again. For metaphor, you can see that metaphor is when there is a comparison between two different things which share something in common. For example, word is your oyster. Metonymy is when a phrase is replaced with another which has a similar meaning used to describe something in an indirect manner. For example, I remain loyal to the crown. We have discussed this example earlier as well. So you can refer to the next examples as well in the previous slide. For onomatopoeia, it's a word which resembles the sound it is describing. For example, my watch ticks loudly. So loudly is referring to the watch. And oxymoron is when two words in a phrase contradict one another. That is, the girl next door is pretty ugly. So the pretty and ugly, these two are contradicting words. For paradox, it's a statement which contradicts itself. Deep down, Anna is really shallow. So it's again contradicting itself. For personification, it is a new figure of speech. In this slide, personification is when an object which is not alive is given human qualities or attributes. For example, my car is the real beauty. So beauty is referred to the living things and car is non-living. So attributing human qualities or living qualities to non-living thing is the personification. So fan is talking is again over here we have personification because fan is a non-living thing and fan it's not an attribute of fan to talk. For pun, it is a play on words. It uses a word to give different sense to the sentence and add a double meaning. For example, an egg for breakfast is not easy to beat. We have discussed it earlier. For simile, we have discussed it earlier. Her hair was as golden as the sun. So basically in simile, we compare something to something using words like as or like. For Synecdoche is a statement in which only part of a something is expressed to relate to the whole. So we have discussed Synecdoche as well earlier. For understatement, I only have $2 million. We have discussed understatement as well, that is made to be less important than what is actually being conveyed. So what is a figure of speech? Now, language that uses figures of speech is known as collectively as figurative language. You will find examples of figurative language in novels, poems, essays, and plays. So the opposite of figurative language is literal language. Literal language is a type of straightforward writing you will find on road signs, in office memos, and in research papers. First one is alliteration. So alliteration is the repetition of initial consonant sound in words that are in close proximity to each other. By close proximity, we mean words that can be but don't have to be consecutive. Perhaps the easiest way to recognize alliteration is to see in action. So take a look at these examples. Leopard lizards, Taco Tuesday, we went whale watching, all the initial consonants of the words and they go together with close proximity. Another term for alliteration is the initial rhyme because it's literally the reverse of a rhyme instead of repeating a sound at the end of two or more words. Alliteration is repeating a sound at the beginning of two or more words, and alliteration is about repetition of sound, not simply of letters written on the page. So that's why Soul sells cell phones, which repeats the ESS sound, is alliteration, but so one charges cell phones isn't. So this repetition is what makes alliteration so popular in poetry, storytelling, speeches, and business names. When we hear alliteration spoken aloud, rhythm it creates give the words a poetic, even musical feel. Now we have antithesis. Antithesis is a literary technique that places opposite things or ideas next to one another in order to draw out their contrast. Here we have example that it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It's Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. So it's a literary technique which places opposite things or ideas next to one another in order to grasp the attention, or you can say draw out their contrast. Antithesis is a literary device that positions opposite ideas parallel to each other. Think heroes and villains, hot and cold, bitter and sweet. Antithesis enhances your writing by illuminating differences and making your point more persuasive as well. Now moving towards apostrophe. Apostrophe is a figure of speech is when a character addresses someone or something that is not present or cannot respond. The character might speak to someone deceased, an inanimate object, or a concept. So all these things are not living things. So, oh Romeo, Romeo, where for are those? There's an old English language. You can see Romeo, William Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet. So it's apostrophe is something that you addressing someone who is either not present or cannot respond. And the character might speak to someone who is deceased, whose inanimate object, or you can say maybe talking to a concept. So circumlocution is another figure of speech, as you can see over here. Circumlocution is the use of a purposely word description. You can think of it as talking in circles. Example, in the Harry Potter series, most characters don't say Lord Voldemort's name. Instead, they use this circumlocution, he who must not be named. Now we have epigram. An epigram is a clever and memorable statement. You will find epigrams in speeches, poetry, and at the front of the book. So examples are here that no one can make you feel in fear without your consent, Eleanor Roosevelt. So the references are also mentioned at the end of the examples. You can just refer to it. So for euphemism, you can see a euphemism is a way to say something in an understated manner, often to avoid difficult topics. So for example, you can see that can be an uncomfortable subject. So we have developed many euphemisms to avoid confronting it head on. So rather than telling a friend that a relative died, you might say they kicked the bucket or passed away, or you can say that no, they're no longer with us. So hyperbole is a deliberate exaggeration that adds emphasis, urgency, or excitement to a statement. Example, if I don't eat soon, I'm going to die of hunger. For irony, you can see that irony is a situation that subverts a reader's expectations. For example, one of the characters in your story is a hypochondriac, always convinced that they have an exotic and uncurable disease. An ironic ending for that character would be if they died of a common cold. The next one is litotes. So in litotes, use a double negative to create a positive. You can see that in example, you are not wrong. So it's a double negative, and you are creating a positive impact. For metaphor, it's a direct comparison of dissimilar things to create more vivid imagery or understanding. For example, he was an iron. To understand him, she had to peel back the layers. The next one is metonymy, and metonymy is a literary device in which a word or object stands in for a closely related word or object. Metonymy gives a writer more variability with descriptions, as you can see in the example. I thought his movies were better when they were not so Hollywood. So this is the example of metonymy. And the next one we have onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is a word that sounds like what it means. For example, when a character is exasperated, they might exclaim, shh. That's both a word to show exasperation and a sound that happens when you sigh loudly. So for oxymoron, an oxymoron is a phrase that uses two contradictory words to create a new meaning. Examples are that strawberry cake was awfully good. So they use two contradictory words to create a new meaning over. Next figure of speech is paradox. So a paradox is a statement that appears to contradict itself but contains some truth, theme, or humor. For example, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. So the reference has been given or provided at All World Animal Farm. This paradox is used. And for personification, we have discussed it, so we are discussing it again, that personification is assigning human attributes or qualities to non-human things, or giving human qualities to non-living things. For example, the floorboards groaned under the weight of each step. They can't groan because it's a characteristic of a living thing, or we can say that the flowers were dancing, the flowers can't dance. So all these are the examples of the personification. For the next figure of speech, we have pleonasm. Pleonasm is the use of more words than necessary to convey meaning. So a writer might use pleonasm for humor or emphasis, or they might not realize they are using extra words at all. For example, the burning fire warmed the whole house. So this is an example for figure of speech, and this figure of speech is pleonasm because the burning fire warmed the whole house. Over here, it's used for emphasis, and it can be used for humor as well. Now we have pun. So a pun is a form of wordplay that purposely substitutes words that sound similar but have different meanings. For example, mine is a long and a sad tale, said the mouse, turning to Alice and sighing. It's a long tale, certainly, said Alice, looking down with wonder at the mouse's tail. But why do you call it sad? It's the reference is the mentioned over here that is from Adventures in the Wonderland. And the next one we have a figure of speech, which is simile. So simile compares two dissimilar things using like or as. The goal of simile is to give the reader a more vivid understanding of something. For example, it was the first real day of summer, and by the time she came back indoors, she was as red as tomato. So, as red as tomato over here, it's the simile, and the basic goal of the simile is to give the reader the vivid understanding or picture of something. For Synecdoche, you can see that Synecdoche is when a smaller unit is used to signify a larger unit or vice versa. For example, New England won the game by a touchdown. Here, the New England means New England's football team. So over here, the small unit is signifying a larger unit. For understatement, you can see that for this figure of speech, for understatement, it is the internet. You can say intentional downplaying of a situation. This can create a humorous or deadpan effect in writing. For example, I have to have this operation. It is not very serious. I have this tiny little tumor on the brain. So the reference has been mentioned. I hope you have enjoyed this lesson. If you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, subscribe it to get more updates related to IELTS, PTE, English grammar, and English language lessons. Thank you.